So welcome everyone. I'm quite pleased today to welcome Simone Lucatello, who is senior researcher at the Institute of Mora in Mexico City. Is also one of the member of the Ipcc in charge of AR6. So you will learn what AR6 is. It's about climate change adaptation. It's one of the international panel on climate change section, and this report is clearly one of the key reports on the science about climate change. And why do we have this session today? It's part of an effort that we a cooperation that we have with the German Institute for Development, which is a think tank based in Bonn, working on sustainability studies. And I think we have today Benjamin Stewart and Reiners with us from the IE, and think tank from the PRODIGEES project, which is a project led by the German Institute for Development, with a researcher from developing countries, but also, like, let's say, the global south, working on sustainability and producing research on sustainability and the link between sustainability and digitalization. And one of these researchers and one of these institutes is Institute Mora, based in Mexico. And we are quite pleased to start this series of webinars about the link between climate change and digitalization with this first webinar about, like, the Ipcc report and review about, like, the science about climate, because that will set the scene basically for further discussion about the interlinkage between digitalization and climate change. And that's why this is part one today, and the part two would be in January, so with Simone, and we'll continue a series of webinars during the year about sustainability and digitalization, so that you learn the interlinkage between the two. You will see also the different efforts that are done, not only, like, in North America and South America, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. So have, like, a global view about the different efforts that are done to fight against climate change, and what digitalization and the digital industry and technology can bring, and also the limits of that. I think that's also will be part of the discussion. So I'm very pleased also to have, like, our students and also alumni and executives attending this webinar. If you want to participate and have questions, I would ask you to maybe raise your question in the chat during the speech from Simone, and then after his speech, then clearly we can have an open discussion, and then you can raise your voice and just speak out and raise your questions. So it has to be an interaction. It's not like just a monologue. All right, so I leave the floor to Simone, and thank you again to you and to Institute Mora.
Thank you very much, Arnaud. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, good morning from Mexico City, and good afternoon to all of you, or wherever you are. Thanks a lot. Well, Arnaud, you said everything, so I'm going to start with the outline, but just let me tell you briefly, guys, that, you know, as Arnaud said, we are based in a very beautiful building in Mexico City, so you're all welcome to visit us. Mexico, as you know, is a big country placed in North America, and I'm in a very small town, 25 million people, so probably the second largest city in the world. So, of course, ironically speaking, I mean, we're talking about one of the major cities which is involved in, and certainly in processes not only linked to climate change, but a lot of vulnerabilities. So we are certainly a very nice place to study from the Global South perspective, climate change, sustainability, and of course, many out of the topic of the global agenda in development studies and also international policy, or even earth science studies. So here's a picture of the volcano Popocatépetl, which is one of the major volcanoes in Mexico. and it's very close to the city. Now it's having its fumarola, which, as you know, the smoke is coming up, is probably one of the major health issues that we're having as a constant threat in the city. So anyway, for you, just to give you a welcome from the new world. So another thing that I like to share with you is what I like to do. I mean, Arnaud, of course, ask you to do, if you want to step in, have questions at the end of the session. But of course, as we are in Latin America, I'm sure you heard about Paulo Freire. Some of you, or maybe who don't have an idea who's the guy, is probably one of the most important pedagogues in the 20th century. And he's a Brazilian guy. And he's one that certainly left an important heritage on radical pedagogy, meaning that, it's more important to dialogue than having monologue or soliloquy. So what I like to do here is, of course, dialogue, because this liberates instead of oppressing, because we are all used to have, a lot of chat and talks, which sometimes are monologue, but especially if there are technical issues like the one I'm going to talk to. So please, I beg you to interrupt me or to step in if something is not clear, so we can have also, a discussion, of course, at the end, but also if you want during the chat. So as Arnaud said, this is the first part, and we are talking today about the climate change. What is climate change? Some of the difference that we have with other concepts that we usually think that may be similar or synonymous, like global warming or greenhouse effects or other stuff that people may know or see in the media. But let me tell you, the media sometimes make a lot of confusion about what are really the technical terms and the scientific terms. So what I'm going to do today, this is a sort of an outline, based on minutes. I hope I can follow it, but of course, it's a lot of material. I mean, remember, the climate change is really, as always says, it is an encyclopedia in terms of knowledge, because it encompasses all these disciplines, from earth sciences to social and humanities. So we really need a knowledge that, unfortunately, I don't have. I wish to have, but many of us who are working in climate change, the more we study, the more we acknowledge that we don't know a lot of things. So remember, as a first point, that we're really talking about complex issue that started from the biophysics and the bio nature of the planet, and then we move to the way humans impact and relate to the surroundings or to the environment where we live in. So this is important for you to know, because my perspective, I'm a social scientist, but I have a background in earth sciences. So I'm sort of kind of, a science interface. So I try to understand what my colleagues from climatology and meteorology say, and what we say from social sciences, how we interpret climate change, this is a very important issue, because it depends on the lenses that we put on, we define and we understand how climate change is impacting and how it's having, all these impacts again that we see every day. So in the outline again, I'll try to go into some climate basis in science, having a look on the current agenda, the global agenda, and then the IPCC role in the climate change. What is the IPCC? Why it is important? What is, the literature that we are producing, which is huge and probably the most relevant and most important that we have in terms of science production. And then I'm based in North America, so many of you may know, especially in Italy, I know very well because I'm from there originally. We always place Mexico probably in between South and not only Italy. I mean, all Europe, we need sometimes a bit more of geographical learning about where the countries are. So, and I'm saying that critically and of course in a sarcastic way, but Mexico is North America. Some of you may place it in Central America, which is up to a certain point fine, but definitely is not South America, is North America. So together with the United States and Canada, it's part of a chapter in the IPCC, but also in the literature on climate change. Usually the models of impacts of climate change are based on a region that is called North America, which is a social construction, because it's not a region recognized as such, like in the European Union or Asia, but is definitely part of the narrative within the region. So I'm going to talk about that because, again, the experience that we have in my institution and personally over more than 25 years in this part of the world. So this is something that I'd like to share with you. And then, of course, because this will be the second part, as Arnaud said, in January, I tried to do some linking with digitalization, which is definitely a major component, I guess, for and also for our brain to understand really the important links that may have climate change with digitalization. Let me start with the situation that we have at the moment. It's an interesting the time for sort of review of what's been happening in terms of climate change over the past few years. So, as you know, we are now 5 years away from the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015 in France, and it has, of course, there is a balance that institutions are doing now, and government, actually more than institution, government and United Nations too. So we have a sort of an idea of how we are complying with the Paris Agreement, which is, unfortunately, this is the first bad news. We are not doing enough with the compliance of the Paris Agreement because countries, for different reasons, including the pandemic, the coronavirus, we are not getting to the target that are established by the Paris Agreement. I will talk about that in a few minutes. Then, as you know, this year we had a very important conference of the party. COP stands for Conference of the Parties, which are the members of the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, and is the number 26. Do you know why 26? So any of you can tell me, remember Freire in this idea of dialogue. You know why 26? Well, where is the number from? You know, COP again is, I give you a hint, COP is Conference of the Party. 26? Well, I don't see the chat, but anyway, if you can step it. Anyway, 26, because this is the number of the years that we have since the United Nations Framework for Climate Change started, which is 1994. So we are 26 years since we got, the first meeting of the countries that gathered around the climate change conventions, and now we got to the 26. So if we also look at the different protocols that belong to the climate change convention, like the Kyoto Protocol, they also have numbers and acronyms like MOP, which is members of the party, and the numbers of the years, usually that they are associated, with the evolution of the regime around the climate change convention, right? So it's interesting because it was postponed again. This year was supposed to be in Glasgow, but the pandemic made everything postponing until next year. And UK and Italy are the countries who are hosting the COP26. And part of the issue, of course, of the discussion in the COP is not only how we are, complying and going up with the Paris Agreement, but also what we will have as a global stocktake in 2023. What is the global stocktake? Basically is, saying again how countries are complying with emission reductions in regard to the Paris agreements until 2023. So this is a very crucial and important moment. Then we get the Ipcc cycle assessment, AR6. AR means assessment report number 6. Again, this is, this is common in the climate change narrative that you get acronyms and numbers, as I said. So 6 is the number of the cycles related to the production of this huge information assessment that we as a scientists do. And I'm talking about, 600, 700, 800 scientists involved in producing this huge report, which is based in 3 different volumes, and I will talk also about that. And this is the latest one, which is interesting. I was looking a few days ago about the new presidency of the G20. You know that the group of 20 countries, the G20 is the group of the major, let's say, economies in the world, and include, of course, developing countries and most of the global south, including Mexico, Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia, whatever. And the presidency for 2021, which is under the Italian government, will have 3 important pillars, which are people, planet, and prosperity. But moreover, which is wonderful for us, is that the 3 main topics that will be analyzed during the G20 and the T20, which is the think tank of the 20 governments belonging to the G20, will be digitalization, climate change, and inequalities. So the first 2, abracadabra, are the 2 ones that we have that are part of the seminar that we're going to have today and in January. So this is very important for you. This is the first measure. Have a look, please, towards not only the government of Italy, of course, is doing with the G20, but mostly what all the countries are involved will be looking at the way we link climate change, digitalization, and inequalities. So again, it seems to me that with the previous information that I gave you, the global agenda is really gathering momentum around digitalization and climate change, whatever we mean with the 2 things, right? So before I start with the introduction, any comment, any question on this? I'm sorry, I don't see the chat. I don't know how to do that. I hope I don't need to get out of the PowerPoint. So Arnaud, can I ask you, is there any question? Sorry. Is there any question there from people? No. I don't hear you.
I will check the chat. At the moment, I don't see any question.
Okay.
Yeah, there is one question from Lorenzo Manca, who is
yes.
Asking who is gonna carry out the stock take.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. How?
Who is going to carry out the stock take?
Yeah.
2023.
Okay, so I'll show you something. Right. Okay, I'll show you something. Just give me a second. I get off this one and I move to this one. Okay.
And just I have one comment is that next year we will have also a workshop on the G20, G7 in Nice. And we'll have a follow up on the G20 presidency of Italy.
Great, wonderful. Yeah. So look, this is a very interesting map. I'm not sure if you have the opportunity, if you had the opportunity to look at. This is the. I hope you can see. It's a moving picture about the climate regime map. This is to answer briefly to the question from the colleague. So this is for you to have an idea of how complex is, in the layers that are building around the climate regime, and how they turn around an important axis, which is the Convention for Climate Change. So the global stock take will be going through all these different layers that we have here, and it will take part from the scientific point of view, because we need first of all to have numbers clear and model clear about the impacts of climate change, and then it will move into different layers again about all the actors who are involved currently in the climate agenda. So it is not clear yet how many countries will participate. I mean, of course, this depends on the resolution that's come from the meeting of the convention. The COP was supposed to lead, the COP26 was supposed to lead the way through the global stock take, but we're still waiting at least some hints and information coming from the Secretariat. By the way, the Secretariat of the United Nations Framework Convention, which is placed around here, as you see in my mouse, it's led by Patricia Castellano Espinosa, which is Mexican, and she was the former Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico. So she's an expert, and they're based, as you know, in Bonn, in Germany. So the Secretariat has also the role for that. But again, this is, I think, quite interesting for you, Map. You can take there, down the website and see how this hierarchy, including technology, finance, revision, adaptation, mitigation, and so on, build up again this momentum that I was telling you. So this is a very important for you to know and see, how again this convention is working and the regime is going toward the global stock take, right? So thanks. I'll go back to the other presentation. The one I had before, sorry. Because I have a lot of things open, so you will see. Just give me a second.
Lorenzo, is it okay for the answer? Or
yeah. Are you okay, Lorenzo?
Okay. Yes, you say yes.
Okay, so now getting into a little bit of science of climate change, guys. What do we know about climate change? Why it is so important at the moment to talk about climate change, and what is the role of climate science? So I think we don't have time, but it was my idea. But what I'm going to try to do is an ice breaking if you want. But seeing the time, I think I'm going to skip this part. But the point I'd like you to know is, what do you know about climate change? What would you like to learn, and what are the questions that you would like me to address? Of course, I have a lot of information, but generally speaking, it is important for you. If we give just 1 minute, if you want, you can open. If I'm allowed, I'm asking moderator, let me do that. If you want, just quickly, just a few words. What do you know about climate change? It would be for me important to know, the audience. What are we talking about? How much do you know about climate change? Can we do that, Arnaud, very quickly?
Yes. If you can just fill in the chat your answers.
Okay. So yeah. So yeah, again, I cannot see the chat. I don't know why, but yeah. Or if people want, quickly to speak, I think it's also fine. Can we do that?
Yes, you can also speak out and.
Yeah. Again, very briefly for people, I can hear your voice and see what you think. Just try to tell me, guys, what do you know about climate change? Just 4 or 5 comments, no more, so I can start, right?
Yeah. Okay, so please go ahead. So, please, for example,
can I speak for a minute?
Yes, of course.
So I think climate change is a huge threat for the future of our world, and of course we have to intervene as much as possible and as quick as possible. So coronavirus, it's a huge problem as well, but it doesn't have to keep away our thoughts about how to deal with climate change this year and in the future. I think this.
Right. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Next.
Hi, my name is Allison Hamzy.
Hi.
I more so have a comment on something I'd love to learn more about, more so on corporations' roles in perpetuating climate change and how we can work in the future to hold them accountable and to lessen the impacts that corporations specifically contribute to climate change. Because I think I noticed, like, in the discourse in the mainstream media and discussions about climate change, often it's just talking about individual levels that people can use to help lessen the impacts of climate change. But I would like to see more actionable items on how we can get corporations to lessen their very large impact on climate change. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, very good question. Thank you, Alison. Yep. Next.
Next, we have Benjamin. If you want to speak out, maybe Benjamin.
Yeah, sure. Hold on one moment. Yeah, if you can hear me. So what I would like to know about climate change, we'll say, is I feel like there's a lot of information out there. There's a new article or a new report, seemingly every week. And so where is it that I can find the most reliable or at least up-to-date information about that is pertinent to me? So perhaps my national impact data. So what sources, I guess, would you recommend? Yeah.
Yep, thanks. Great. Another one, and then yeah.
I have a question also, more about a precise topic about the les accords de Paris, the Paris agreements, and wanted to know if there was restrictive enough and to countries to respect it and to deal with climate change.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Loika.
Thank you very much, all of you. Yes, of course, I know, I understand. Yeah, there is a lot of confusion around, climate change and all of the impacts, but also how, again, countries are, dealing again with the compliance period around the Paris Agreement. And of course, the issue of information. Just to give you an idea, there, in scientific terms, because what we do in the Ipcc is an assessment of the literature available around climate change. There are around 500,000 of papers coming out on climate change every year, which is a huge amount, as you can understand. You can imagine a huge amount of information, which is also very difficult to track, and also very difficult to to see really what's been published and to, let's say, in relation to what. Because again, remember what I said at the beginning, we have a huge kind of disciplines involved in the study of climate change. So just physics and, again, climatology, meteorology, whatever. We're talking about at least 20-25 disciplines who are contributing to the knowledge of climate change. And it's really impressive, the amount of information. Besides, what we get from international organizations, as you also, and this is some data that came out from the World Bank and the other organizations, that 70% of the papers that are published by international organization go unread because we don't have time to read everything. And again, the amount of information that we have, it's huge. So of course, it depends on what you want to look for, what is your background, and what you're interested in, because there are also level of information. We have things that, you know, come out from International Geographic, which are very, let's say, divulgative, and it can get, you know, it can outreach a lot of people around the world. But then you get really specialized stuff that you need to read it through 3 or 4 times, even if you're not an expert now, because sometimes it's very, very complicated. So I'm taking note of everything. Of course, I'll try to touch, you know, along my presentation, all the points that you are mentioning. So let me go through this again. So what is a climate change, and what are we thinking? I mean, there are, of course, the definition around climate change. The most used one are the one coming from Article 1 by the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, and of course from the Ipcc, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. I'll also talk about that soon. So we have, again, a lot of information, and one of the most used definition, I would say, again, is the UNFCCC one, which is there, and it says, you know, there's a change of climate which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity. This is very, very important, because this is part of the debate that we still have, though, you know, 98% of the confidence that we have in the scientific domain, we know that climate change is there, is sure, and is certainly attributed to human activity. But the important thing is that evidence says that climate change, of course, been there for millions of years. It's not there just, you know, over 100 years or more, but it's been there since the beginning of the planet, of the Earth. So it's important that the Article 1 in the Convention reflects this idea that there are 2 main issues, you know, combined that affect or are related to the way we understand climate change. So again, one is the natural effect due to the planet and its own dynamics, natural dynamics, biophysical dynamics, and indirectly somehow to the human activity. And in working group 2 of the Ipcc, where all social scientists are, and I'm included there, what we know and what we're studying is how this human activity is having really an impact, not only in the atmosphere through emission based from industries, from individuals, from companies, or a lot of things, but also how the natural climate variability and the natural, you know, and the planet and its relation with the sun and many other natural components are affecting over time the climate of the planet, right? And then we get from the Ipcc, which is again, you know, the hard science vision, where the maths come in, statistically significant variation in the mean, in the global temperature surface, and so on. So a lot of things that we need, you know, somehow to understand. This is my idea to give you really a very brief overview of what this mean, and, you know, for you to understand how, again, complex it is to understand why climate change is there and why it is affecting. So the first thing I like to clear out with you is what is the difference between climate change and global warming. So I'm sure that many of you may understand it in the same way, but they really have 2 different ways. Is anyone there that can help me to read, please? Any of you that can read what is global warming?
Sure, I can.
Thank you.
Global warming refers to the long-term warming of the planet. Global temperature shows a well-documented rise since the early 20th century, and most notably since the late 1970s. Worldwide, since 1880, the average surface temperature has risen about 1 degree Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit.
Thank you. And the next one, if you're there, thanks. Climate change. Can you read that one too?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you were talking to me. Definitely.
Sorry. Alison, yeah.
Climate change encompasses global warming, but refers to the broader range of changes that are happening to our planet. These include rising sea levels, shrinking mountain glaciers, accelerating ice melt in Greenland, Antarctica, and the Arctic, and shifts in plant blooming times. So
the difference?
Global warming and climate change are sometimes used interchangeably, but strictly they refer to slightly different things.
Okay. So this is the very first step that I like, to share with you guys. This is very important to understand the difference between global warming and climate change. Again, as we say, they are related, but they are measured in very different ways. a long time along in terms of warming about the planet, but also, you know, in what is happening, the impacts. So how do we measure climate change? We measure, and we know that climate change is happening because we have some signals coming from nature. They include sea level rise, as we said, shrinking mountain glaciers, and I will show you something that is happening in North America, for example, and then ice melt in Greenland and Media. So things that we know that are happening and are signals that we are trying to understand that are related to climate change belong to this kind, you know, of this set of definition that we are having here. Why global warming is also due to some natural processes, because global warming, this is another mistake or something that we need to you know, mystify in terms of it is really bad, global warming. But it's not bad because, let me tell you guys, the temperature that we have now in the planet and the way we as humans, you know, can live in the planet is because we have global warming. So global warming is a natural process that has been happening over time since the beginning of the Earth, again. But the point is that if we are, as usually, you know, having, let's say, an intervention as a human, that's why we're talking about direct intervention of humankind into the way that, you know, we alterate the global warming, well, this is what is happening. So global warming refers to something that, you know, has been there, but we are, as a human, having an interference there with our model of living, if you want, with our emissions system due to industrial processes, again. So I will show you now some other stuff. But the global warming, again, you know, is a process that can be negative because, again, humans are intervening, right? So this is very important. So what we know is that so far, since 1880, why 1880? Does anybody know what is this in historical terms? What is that age? What is this? What is the 1880? Sorry?
Industrial Revolution.
All right, very good one. So yes, so we are measuring, you know, from 1880, what is the average surface of the planet based on the emission that we started in that year, which is the Industrial Revolution. The second one, because we have, you know, 3-year Industrial Revolution, so there was one a little bit before, but usually what we have from Arrhenius and some other authors who start to work, you know, about emission in England, and then they moved around the different country, as you know, depending on how the Industrial Revolution spread. But we're measuring that since, again, you know, 150 years. So that's why we're talking about, and we'll see that, the Anthropocene as a geological era. All right. So there are a lot of concepts there, but this is important. So are you clear, guys, with global warming and climate change difference? Did you know that? So if you listen about that, the important thing is that, okay, just remember, it's not the same. They are slightly different. Okay. So another important concept that I like to draw from physical sciences is important. You know that the major source of energy for the planet is the sun. So what does the sun do all the time, every day for millions of years? Is sending energy through particles to the planet. Those particles contributed to natural processes like the photosynthesis and many other things that you may have learned, you know, in your high school classes of biology, whatever. But you know, there is an important process of inflow and outflow of energy coming from the sun, going to the sun, to into the earth, and getting, you know, back, because the earth works like a mirror. Is sometimes it catches energy, but also it reflects energy out to the space. So this process of incoming and outcoming flow of radiation is very important because it is the origin, if you want, of what is the global warming and then climate change. Why? For a very simple reason, because these particle energies that comes into the planet and goes out remain trapped in the atmosphere, because gases that we are now emitting, like CO2, like methane, or many other gases, they do not dissolve in the atmosphere, and they stay there. They float around the atmosphere, and they actually, if you want, in a very simple way, they get married, or they catch the energy that comes from the sun, and, you know, they stay there in a process that is called heating or heat trapped, and they create a sort of climate warming, meaning that, you know, there is a combination again of the energy coming from particles from the sun and those who are already present in the atmosphere. And this constant marriage, let's say, of particles that are trapped together make a very simple phenomena, which is called the global warming, right? So this is important because, again, those particles cannot get out of the atmosphere because there are others who are there for many years, by the way, some of them naturally, some other man-made, and again, they trap the heat coming from the sun, and these are basically a process of accumulation of energy, and this energy stays there in the atmosphere. So it doesn't go up and out to the space. And what happens? It happens that it goes down. It creates this kind of, again, level of, the increase of temperature in the global surface, right? This is very important. So for you to know, there is a lot of literature, but this is the basis of what we know about, dynamics of energy and particles coming from the sun, getting into the earth and get back. All right. So this is very important. Again, there are a lot of colleagues, the atmospheric chemistry, this is the discipline that looks at that, and some others. But basically, again, this is all reflected in a lot of literature. It is part of the greenhouse gases effect too, right? Any doubt?
No.
Did you know about the origins? Yeah, this is very important. Again, remember the physical parts, right? So, okay. So we keep on with this one. Now you learn a little bit about the physics if you want. Again, it's much more complex because I'm not now talking about for example what volcano does or what volcanoes do in general terms, or what other sources like the oceans or the forests and woods and so on. What do they do to this process of the carbon cycle around the world? So this is again I don't have time today to do that, but if anyone's want, I can provide you with information with additional references for this topic. But remember that again, it's quite complex. But the one before is really the basis of the climate science. Then there are two words in very important concept, I would say, that are certainly linked to the issue of climate change, which are mitigation and adaptation. So what do we know? What is mitigation and what is adaptation? What is resilience? Also, this buzzword has been used, in many. We find it in a lot of documents, in international documents, and of course in the narrative, everybody's talking about resilience. I'm personally a bit skeptical about the word. We'll tell you why. But let me tell you that most of the interest is now concentrating around the way we are doing mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation refers to the way we, as government, company, individuals, all actors who are in the living planet, act to reduce and curb emissions. Emissions coming from, again, processes where humans are involved, right? So mitigation measures are, again, those who serve to curb or to stop emissions reductions. While the adaptation is reducing vulnerability, another very important concept in climate change studies. And vulnerability, again, means the exposure that we have as people, again, or as ecosystems or social systems we have towards climate change. And not only to climate change, it can be a lot of things, but in this case, specifically, we are vulnerable to the impacts of climate. So adaptation does that, right? So in terms of mitigation, what we do is we attend the causes of the climate change, while adaptation addresses the impacts, right? This is a very important distinction. So remember, if you are involved in a project that we're doing mitigation, you know that it can be, energy. It can be, for example, renewable energy is the classical example of how we do mitigation. Means that we are trying to reduce our footprint depending on carbon fossil fuels, and we are trying to change it to other sources which are not so polluting, like oil and so on, right? While adaptation, which is a bit more conservative concept, it has to do with the way we adapt to the changes that climate is producing to humankind, right? This is again a very second set of concepts that I'd like you to take away today from this lecture, right? And then the third point is resilience. Again, I was saying, to me, it is still complicated. I've been doing a lot of work on resilience, and my conclusion that many people don't know what is it. how to treat it, and how do they do resilience. If I ask you guys, what is resilience? If any one of you is involved in resilience, well, it's a very nice buzzword like democracy, like justice, whatever. But in my point of view, it's very complicated to understand. So that's why in the Ipcc, in the reports, there is a lot of let's say yeah, but we are skeptical somehow how to include, well, to my point of view, the resilience concept, because again, not everybody's clear about. So, for example, Latin America, or in at least, well, of course, in Mexico, but in many countries of the region, of Latin America region, where resilience is everywhere. You know, you can see public policies, plenty of resilience concept and the project and so on. But if you ask really people, what is it? Well, you may find that people don't really have a clear understanding. I know that in Europe too, somehow, and in many other countries, of course, in the world, resilience again is a very complex concept to grasp, right? But what is it? Is the ability, this is very simple, this is my definition, this is the ability to bounce back. You know, it comes from engineering, from biology, and a typical image that you have resilience is when you know, a hurricane or a tropical cyclone strikes in a coastal areas, then you get your tree, the palm tree that is, you know, is going down and then back after a strong wind. So this is the idea of resilience somehow, you know, but this is different for people, for ecosystems, and so on. So it would be interesting if we have time to talk at the end about, you know, how you interpreting the concept of resilience, right? So again, mitigation and adaptation. Any doubt about this, or any comment? Everything clear?
Yeah, everything is clear. I don't see anything on the chat. Otherwise, you can speak out if you have questions.
Yes, yeah, please step in, and if there are things that you know already, also let me know, because you know this is sometimes something that can be the basis, but it's important to build concepts, right? So just to give you some example, this is what we have now in terms of why you know many news are now concentrated around the Arctic, because this is the part of the world where we see the most important effects of climate change, or the impacts, because it's reducing the mass of water and ice that is there is reducing over time. So this is from last year, is the minimum that we have recorded about the surface and the huge amount of mass of water and ice that we have there, that has been reduced again over time. And if you see, you know, over the last 30 years, is really crazy. We almost got 30% less of the mass of the Arctic. So what does it mean to you if we reduce the Arctic? What is the, I give you a hint, where is the water going? Well, of course, I mean, we have a lot of water that is melting, that is not going back there, is not going to replace somehow. And this water is, of course, going around the world, spreading around the ocean. That's why we have, that is why we have rising sea levels, right? Okay, so we have here a series of the Arctic sea ice extent. Again, you know, from the 70s, that's where we have a lot of information there. But again, we can apply it for Greenland and for mostly in the Arctic and Canada, and if you want, Norway, Russia, and so on. So this is having also a lot of geopolitical consequences. We will see if we have time. But this is important for you to know. This is one of the spots that now in the Ipcc also we are looking at, right? This is a very interesting map about North America. All little small dots are risk zone due to the sea level rise. So if you can clearly see from, maybe Canada is not very well represented there, but look at the US and Mexico, and of course part of the Caribbean, which is already happening in Central America. So with the sea level rise, and we're talking about this water coming from the Arctic and many other parts, well, we will have probably in the next 50, 60 years, if we do not do more than what we need to do under the Paris Agreement, we will have all the spots, meaning that people in the coastal area, living in coastal area, will be, underwater, will be somehow sinking, I'm saying, right? We see it in again, those are signals. This is not a map based on simple projection. This is being done, you know, through, again, a very important calculation that colleagues from the region are doing. Right. This is, of course, a picture about New York, Manhattan. You can certainly see, I hope you can see down, you know, the part of what will be it is 2050, sorry, scenario, 2050 scenario about the sea level rise in that part of the world. So you can clearly see, you know, we're talking about 1 meter or 2 meters of water, depending, right? And this is what's happening in Mexico. This is the southeast region around the Yucatan Peninsula. This is the state of Tabasco. Tabasco is one of probably of the most cases, if you've seen the literature, I'm not sure if you heard about it, but yeah, we are now having a crisis there, a huge crisis of water due to intense rainfalls, but also to the sea level rise. So what you can see this is the National Atlas from the risk natural risk in Mexico from the government and the Center for National Disasters Prevention. And what you can see simply there is, what this part of the country is the southeast, is the border with Guatemala, and then you get the Yucatan Peninsula. You will see clearly how this part of the country is underwater almost permanently. And the bad news also is that this is the region where we are producing more oil, because a lot of the petrochemicals and also the oil production from the national company Pemex is doing, right? So yeah, the idea, if I'm right, Arnaud was showing a little bit more about the region, but there are plenty of cases, of course, in Europe, what is happening in Venice in these days, again, with in the Mediterranean, but what we get in the Northern Sea. And just pick up, just say something, and we will find definitely a case for you, right? So I'm trying to close down on this part, just to give you I hope that some of you will take away also some idea here. Why do we need to study the climate and climate change? Because we will have huge impacts on ecosystems, in the way we live in the planet, our relation with nature, and many other things. So the soil, the agriculture production, food security, the number of impacts for climate change is really huge. Again, it's complex, but it's really big, and it's having effects in all, if you want, nature, human nature relations, right? So it will affect people and society. I'll talk about the water. This is available for human use, drought, storms, floods, and so on. This is not well. I'm pointing out something on Bangladesh, because this is also a very, very important case. Probably is the most dramatic case that we're assisting in the world. The delta, of the river that is there in Bangladesh is probably flooding around 45 million people, and it implies that we will have climate refugees, as they call now, so huge, massive migration movements due to climate change, right? And so on. So again, this is really something that I want to tell you, because this is a transformation that is coming. Is a nice word that sociologists use it. So it's a huge transformation affecting again, the way we relate as a human with nature, right? So another important difference is that between meteorology, which is the study of weather, and with climatology, which is the study of weather statistics, pattern, and trends. Again, there are two important things. I don't have time probably to go through much to this. I'm going to give you some example maybe, but simply remember also that, when we ask what is the weather like, this is the typical question. You don't ask about what is the climate today. You say, what is the weather today? Because this is based on short-term projection about the weather, right? So today is going to rain, tomorrow is going to snow, today, whatever. But when we talk about what is the climate, we will talk about over time, and we say, well, climate in Mexico during summer is, rainy because it's the rainy season, it's humid. But we don't say it's going to rain every day or it's going to snow, whatever. We have, this is based, again, on a series of time. So keep in mind the difference between meteorology and climatology, right? Again, I'm going to go through the, well, okay, I'll skip this part because this is something technical. I see that it's already 10. So let me talk about, this is the second part before I go into the Ipcc issue. Let me talk about another important concept that now is going around the narrative. And there is a lot of consensus among the scientific community about what is the Anthropocene, right? We are now in the era which is dominated by man, so the anthro, right? And we are affecting the way, the planet, again, is relating with us. So we call it the Anthropocene. It is different from other geological eras, which are, the Pleistocene or the Cambrian or the whatever you want to like it. I mean, we're talking about 13 billion years of history evolution of the planet, and we are now in this map that you can see at the end. So we're talking about less than 250,000 years, so which is dominated by, again, man and the Anthropocene era. Remember also how thick and how thin we are compared to what is out there in the universe, right? You remember we are a very, very little tiny spot into the galaxy, into the universe. So again, you know, this is just to give you an idea, to keep it pace of what are we and what we are really, right, in space and time. So again, you know, we are talking about a new geological epoch, and humans have become the driving forces for the changes on the planet. So now, you know, we are not talking about the way nature was dominating man, but now is the reverse. How, or the opposite, how humans actually, humankind is affecting the nature, right? So I'm going to show you this one. This is a very important, two very small, brief videos. Brief video. This is, can you see all?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah. So
I'm going to run. This is about very few seconds. So before I run it, let me explain to you what you see here. Sorry, guys. This is run by the NASA and some other space agencies. What you will see here is the changing of the global temperature from the period of the Industrial Revolution to last year. And you will see how the concentration also of gases are distributing around the planet, right? So have a look. It's about 30 seconds, but it's also very impacting. All the time I produce this one with the students and with audience is really important for you to understand where we are and what we are doing, right? So have a look down, you know, this is the number of years, and see the colors. On the left side, you also have the temperature, and you from -2 degrees to up to 2 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature established by the Framework Convention of Climate Change, right? So have a look over the last 30 years, please, from 92 to 2020. Okay, well, this is the situation where we are now, right? I'm sorry. I'm gonna run it. It's about 30 seconds. See, you know, again, what we are doing as humans, again, in terms of emissions, and why is important to study all these effects into, if you will, into your, let's say, in humankind at the moment, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. Any reaction on this? So what is again? Sorry. What is it? Where is the concentrating? Let's see. I like you to do some reasoning here. A very simple one, if you can, in terms of time. I'm sorry. I can't. Why? Where is concentrating most? You know, the red light, let's say, or the red spots. Any comment?
On the northern hemisphere, like on the North Pole.
Right. Why is that?
Because there is the most affected area by the climate change, because it's more on the sun ray. They arrives particularly there in the North Hemisphere. I don't know how to explain in English, but
okay, that can be one. But because remember, the emissions, most of the emissions are concentrated in the Northern Hemisphere. So you have the most industrialized countries who are responsible of the emissions, who are concentrated mostly in the northern part of the hemisphere, right? This is why. Okay, we have. I mean, of course, Australia is a different case, because of course Australia is also big emitters. But if you see, you know, North America, Europe, and of course China, the three of them, you know, contribute around the 80-85% of 90% of the emissions. So all these emissions also due to other streams effect, natural effect, you know, the Coriolis effect and many other stuff in the meteorology, but they concentrate the emissions over that part of the planet, right? This is why also it's going up to the Arctic. Okay, this is one, and the other one I want to show you again is a very brief one, a very short one. Sorry, it's oh my God, is this one. This is another way of looking at what we just saw, but just country by country. Again, from 1850, a little bit earlier, to 2018. And what you will see here is how countries around the world are changing their climate and the average temperature in the surface from the last 120 years. Okay, this is, and check again from this is -3 degrees Celsius to +3 degrees Celsius. Up there you can check the number of years, the counting of the years going up, and you will see how they are changing, right? Of course, peaks depend also the wars, the World War I, World War II, and the oil, let's say, rush around the 60s and the 70s of the last century, right? But again, this is a way of which I think is quite impacting as well, to see how it's changing around, and have a look at, again, about the last 50 years, how countries are changing their temperatures. This map is used now by the to measure the compliance with the Sustainable Development Goals as well, and the Universal Agenda of SDGs, right? Okay, see, it's almost finished. We are getting there. Okay, the last 4 years have been the warmest in the history of the planet. Okay, so you will see where now is actually warming more than other places. So those countries, of course, which are in higher red, are the ones that are getting warmer compared to others, depending on, of course, on other factors. But definitely all the countries belonging to the UN at the moment, 200 and something, have undergone this process, and they are warming up, and are going to average that was much more the one that we were expecting some years ago, right? Okay. So you will have time. If you want, I can send you the information, and you will check what is your country. If you're interested, you can spot and find out how it's been changing over time. Okay. Yeah. Any question?
No, don't see.
Oh.
No.
Okay. Can you see the what can you see? Can you see the
and then your chart?
Okay. See, yes. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, it's just you were asking what we could see, and I could see your YouTube up for a second. Now it's just back to the Ipcc chart.
Oh, Ipcc chart. Okay. Okay. So let's end this part, and I give you some more examples, and I move to the Ipcc issue. So very quickly, guys, again, in this idea of Freire and interchanging ideas, what have you learned from these videos, actually? If we sum up, the information that we gave so far, what is your impression, and what is your takeaway for these two short videos and what I said so far? Very simple one. Again, like 3 or 4 comments, and then we move on. Anything? Any reaction?
You can speak out, or you chat, or you can speak out.
Yes.
I mean, I would say that it was a really nice, sort of like sweeping review of climate change, and then also the terminology around climate change, and I just appreciated the sources that you used and the visuals that went along with it. So yeah, just I would say yes, thank you for the nice background.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? It's okay, right. So let me go on with another couple of things that are very important. So sorry, before I go that, let me show you again something very in terms of what is the impacts of climate change, just to give you an idea, and then I move to the issue of the Ipcc. This is an issue that is going on at the moment. We have a serious conflict at the border with the United States and Mexico about water. It's always been there, This part of the northern part of Mexico is dry, is a desert. Of course, the other part of the United States, the southwest, like California and Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and so on, they have very high parts of of drylands and deserts. But what we are facing now due to climate change is a very interesting case of an example for you to understand how those impacts are related to international, also transboundary issues. So in this first part, you can see, this is probably one of the biggest reservoir of water in the world, and at least in North America. And this is around, the mountains of Colorado, Utah, and so on in the United States, almost on the border with the Pacific Ocean. And, usually the amount of snow that is coming down there over time is so big that, it flows the rivers, a lot of rivers, the Colorado rivers and many others, and those rivers spill over and go to Mexico, all right? So, but what is happening in the last 30, 40 years and even more is that the amount of snow due to global warming and the warming in the United States is producing less, of course, precipitation in terms of water and snow. So what you get is the so-called snowpack, which is the amount, again, of snow that is accumulating in that part of the mountains that it's been reduced drastically or dramatically, and this is not producing enough water for the agriculture and the dikes that we have in the region. So this is implying, because we have a bilateral agreement on water between the two countries, and it is supposed that all these rivers come and again give water to the northern part of Mexico. And what is happening that the United States closed down, because of the sort of national security in terms of water, they closed down part of the flows of the rivers, because those are the recent images about dikes and the border. You see there is no water. And in this part, in the second image, you see how much less water we have, over in the last 20 years. This is the Colorado, close to the Grand Canyon dike. I forgot now the name, sorry, but yeah, this is the amount of, it's like about 10 meters less in terms of volume if you want water. So what are the implications? We have now a huge problem in the border because water is not coming over, and it's not coming through. Actually, sorry, it's not coming through. So there has been now, a discussion. There is again a bilateral commission for international water in the region. And this is something that, again, is strictly related to the amount of water that is coming down, related to the snowpack, okay? So it became a case of national security in both parts of the countries, and it is a conflict for communities, for agriculture, for people, who are working in the agricultural sector, for companies, and so on, right? So the use of water and the issue of water in the border between, again, the northern Mexico and U.S. Southwest of the U.S. is a huge crisis. And this is, again, is a kind of example of the interaction between climate change and water and security. And in the right side of this map, this is the project that we have and that I'm running with some colleagues, is about the impacts that we may have in the regional production of, for example, wine. This is part of the Mexico, is Baja California, and we have there a winery production, very interesting, very similar to the Napa Valley in California. And you need water to produce wine, you need water, and the water is not coming in, and we cannot get it because this also is a very desert and drylands part of the world. So yeah, those are the projection of how less water we may have and how critical can be the idea of not having water in this part. Okay, but this is, again, is very, very much clearly related to climate change. Okay, so this is the way somehow, just give again a very simple example of how we can reason about the way we have relation again with human impacts, let's say, or the raising of temperature and then consequences in natural terms. Okay, fine. So these are reference funded readings, but I wanted to I mean, it's plenty of information, so if you want, I can really give you some other information. So now let me go into the issue of the Ipcc for you to understand a little bit more what is the issue of the Ipcc. Can you see this part, right? Can you all see? Okay. So again, what is the Ipcc? The Ipcc means Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. This was established during the 70s and the 80s by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Program for the Environment. Okay, so it's not an agency, is a board of member states who appoint scientists belonging to the different governments to do work on climate change and its impact. Okay. So from the beginning, from the 70s up to date, and we are currently in the AR6, there has been a production of information based on the knowledge that at the beginning only climate scientists were producing. So in the 80s and 90s, basically 4 or 5 disciplines were involved in the production of information of climate change under the, if you want, what we had before the UNFCCC, which were jointly programs that were not defined as a convention, before Rio 92, but there were some other, under the Stockholm Convention and some other international conventions. We were dealing with climate change, but not in a way that, came up in the 90s and so far. So what we, again, from in 1994, as you know, after the Rio conference in 92, it was established the framework for Convention for Climate Change, which among other things establishes that we shouldn't go, above the 2 degrees Celsius in terms of global warming and the effects that we may have if we want to keep the planet as it is. So this is why, we are talking about 2 degrees, and now I will show you why 1.5. But 2 degrees was established in the convention, and the idea at that time was that the threshold that we shouldn't be overpassed, let's say, or surpass, the 2 degrees, because it was considered at that time what the planet could withstand, in terms of the raising temperature. So 2 degrees was something that was established in the 19th, and it was done by the UNFCCC and then by also colleagues from the Ipcc. Then we got, in the evolution over time, what the science of climate grew exponentially. Because a lot of people, began to work about the climate change impacts in terms of mostly mitigation and then adaptation. So we had, again, here is a sort of very brief and short evolution over time of what is climate change and how within the Ipcc has been evolving. But let me tell you that, adaptation was not, again, at the beginning, until the beginning of the 2000, it was not part of the reports. Only in AR4, which was done in 2007 and which won Nobel Peace Prize, the AR4, the assessment report, began to look at the way of we are adapting, in not only mitigation. Okay, and then we got, every 4 or 5 years, the Ipcc produces an assessment report, and we got what we have now is the AR6, and we are doing this report. The assessment report now is made of around 650 researchers or scientists coming from all over the world, and it's divided in 3 volumes. Volume 1 is about the science and the physics of climate change. Then volume 2 is about adaptation, mitigation, and then volume 3 is about is a mixture of public policies and economy and other issues that are left out in the other two volumes. Okay. In my case, I'm in working group 2, which is about adaptation and risk and vulnerability. So are the major point. Okay, so this is sort of, again, overview of how the science of climate change has been, let's say, produced, over the assessment report a long time. Okay. What is the role of the Ipcc is assess. So we are not a think tank. Or it is not a think tank. It's simply a panel, which assess comprehensive and objective the scientific and technical literature that is coming out about human-induced climate change, impacts and mitigation and action. Okay. The Ipcc is neutral. We don't do policy prescription. We simply inform about the climate change, what is happening in terms of, again, the ecosystems, in terms of the oceans, in terms of and many other issues that are important. And they are translating. Why this is important? Because they are translating into language for policymakers, and then policymakers take, if they want, the evidence to translate it into public policy at national level. Okay, So this is actually the process. So it's information-based knowledge, and this is taken again if country wants to do that, because many countries don't want. We know very well about countries who are skeptical about climate change. They think there's a Chinese hoax or whatever. So not anymore, I hope. But there are a lot of countries who do not take seriously the IPCC reports. They don't care, or they don't give importance at all about the science that's coming up from these reports, right? But again, it's a huge repeat, a huge deal of information with scientific, technical, and socioeconomic factors, right? It is important for us, maybe, I hope, talking about the science policy interface, because again, at the beginning, the first two reports were just for the use of science and used for the scientific community. People were going to look at the report and see what was happening, what were the major drivers. It was very, very technical. If you compare reports, of about 30, 40 years ago to what we have now, they were really meant for policymakers. And now the huge change is that we are, getting into the policy interface. And the good question, the important question that in around the 2000 years, the UN, the United Nations, made to the government was, what do we do with this information? And this is why a lot of things then trickle down into international convention, or if you want, agreements, including the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, and so on. So the idea was to translate it into public policies for humanity, right? And definitely, certainly is a very complex issue. I mean, I see with a lot of my colleagues from the scientific hard sciences and so on. It's very complicated to transmit or to translate, if you want, into a knowledge, a very simple knowledge, or very, let's say, practical information, for policymaker. What is climate change and what do we do about it, right? So we have to think about the communication and how do we do that information. Related to that, there is certainly an evolution of the thinking, as I mentioned to you. So there are also progress in line of evidence, the maturation, as we call it, of the climate science, and even more, at the beginning, we were not so much sure about the evidence of warming due to human-induced processes. And what is the most important thing, I would say, over the last 15, 20 years is that we recognize now at the confidence level of 98% that human influence is central and is clear, it is important, for the changes that we are understanding in the planet at the moment. Okay, so this is based on observation, is based on models and other things. But again, I would say that the maturation of the process is pointing to the fact that we clearly recognize at international level that humans are certainly the most relevant factor, driver for climate change impacts. Okay. It also has impacts is relevant for the Sustainable Development Goals, as you all know, which is a universal agenda. Now, all countries, regardless their economic development, have to comply with the Sustainable Development Goals. And the other one, I'm not sure if many of you know, but there is another framework, important one for disaster risk reduction, which is also universal. This is not only for developing countries, it's for all countries. It's the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Okay. And it has to do, again, with the way we deal with impacts, not only for climate change, but disaster in general. And again, this is a very important question. What are the IPCC reports used for? As I said before, well, it's knowledge, but it's also, again, it should be taken, as we see in the Green Deal, for example, of the European Union at the moment, or in some other countries, it's taken as a part of the national planning for environmental issues, if you want, for sustainability, and also for, of course, climate change. And again, it is important to remind in this science policy interface why it was important to have these reports, because the first report had all the reports have many important impacts in the creation, if you want, or in the realization of what are international conventions or other important instruments that we have at international level for mitigation and adaptation. So the first assessment report FAR led to the creation of the UNFCCC, which is, again, our international framework for climate change, the one that is basically giving us, the way through the climate change regime. Then all the other, the second assessment report, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and now the sixth, all are inputs and focus the attentions to the creation of new instruments for the international community. And the Paris Agreement comes from the assessment report 5 and the main conclusion from the AR5, which has to do with one important thing among many others. I don't have time to go through, but this is a change of 2 degrees to 1.5. So when we got into the Paris Agreement in 2015, what we realized as international community is that 2 degrees were not enough, not anymore. We were really getting so much close with the emissions to this 2 degrees level that we needed to raise the ambitions of the countries. And if you raise ambitions, means that you have to reduce these 2 degrees to 1.5, because otherwise the community is too slow, to respond to the climate's impact. So this is why we keep changing from 2 degrees to 1.5, even 1 now, because Earth is warming, as we will see. This is the science basic. The Earth is warming quickly, and probably much more than what we thought about, 40, 50 years ago. So we are now approaching the 2 degrees in much more rapid terms, probably in 10 years, 15 years at most. So what we need is to raise the ambition of the countries to get not to 2 degrees, but 1.5. Why? Because 1.5 now is considered the threshold for the international community, and not to go over that, otherwise we will have catastrophic impacts for climate change. So this is why, again, it's important to have scientific knowledge and scientific basis, and then translate it into inputs for the policy domain, right? This is why, it's important that the companies get into the deal. Many of companies are there, international transnational corporations are there, not all of them. Of course, those who produce oil and are still based on carbon fossil fuels, energy production, and of course revenues, don't think about this idea, but the world is changing. So remember that everything is based on scientific knowledge, and we are moving again to the political realm in that way. All right. So this is very important, and we are now again in the sixth assessment cycle, and basically this is also accompanied by some special reports. I hope I have time to go through the 1.5. This was the idea, but I gave some general information. So in the last 4 years, from the fifth assessment report to now, some other 4 international reports, huge reports, were produced. 1.5 is one. Then we get the so-called CHIROC, which is the special report on ocean and cryosphere, and many other small reports who contribute, to give more knowledge and information about these processes of climate impacts. So now what we are taking, is sort of stock take from those reports, and now revising the literature and going to produce, next year, maybe the main result of the sixth assessment report about, the climate change impact again. Okay. So there are a lot of methodologies involved. I cannot say very much because I signed a disclosure agreement with Ipcc as an author, as coordinating author. So I cannot give you, unfortunately, the results and the information that we are finding out. But certainly, let me tell you that of course everything is pointing to the issue that this climate change issue is accelerating. We are probably reaching the 1.5 degrees much sooner than we thought, not only the 2 degrees, but 1.5. So again, this must be translated in this narrative of urgency, and this narrative that we all, know about the emergency of doing something for climate change, because it may be too late, right? So this is really the main message that can be there, among other things. So there is also another report on land, because we are also seeing huge impacts in the way land is changing, the food with impacts on food security, sustainable land management, desertification, and so on. And of course the oceans, which is, I think, the most relevant part. I don't know if you heard about the blue carbon issue or some other. Also, the focus was, so far about the planet, about the Earth in terms of land and soil and terrestrial surfaces. But we didn't put an eye really on the oceans. And oceans are also a huge world apart, and we need to know more about oceans, because they play certainly a relevant role, in the way we understand climate, because they absorb emission, but also they have a lot of other functions in producing, you know, food for the humankind and many other stuff. So it's really, really important that we have, you know, we keep an eye to all the surroundings of as humans and the ecosystem that we live with, because we can get a lot of information there. So all these reports are available. They are all part of the stock of the basis where we are starting, you know, with the assessment report number 6. And then, of course, we put together all the other information from papers and knowledge that is coming from different sources, all right, including government. So there are, as again I said, three working groups, and there will be a synthesis report and a report for policymakers, a summary for policymakers, which, you know, will be probably due in 2022, maybe. We don't know yet, but it will inform again, you know, governments to take actions in terms of facing the threat of climate change. Another important point is there will be, you know, over the past 15 years, also cities have become the center of the attention for the governments. Not only because they concentrate, you know, there is an organization called Cities 40, which gathered the most important, the cities which have, you know, the highest number of population. And of course, in economic terms, they are the most important city, are the capital of, you know, 4 or 5 capitals in Europe. Then you get, of course, a couple of cities in the US, of Mexico City. Then you get something in Canada and in many countries. But around 40 cities that were identified at the spots for, you know, studying clearly what are the impacts of the climate change into cities, and that it will be a special report on cities too. So we really, you know, it's a universal agenda again. It's spread out so much from the last 40 years that basically we're trying to encompass all the kind of knowledge and information that is available, you know, on, again, cities, land, oceans, and so on. So really, really a global and a holistic view about the problems that we have facing climate change. Okay. What are some other processes here that are public, you know, about what we're doing with the 6th assessment report. But yeah, if you want some more information, this can be a little bit tedious, but if you want some more information, we can share about you. So and now I'm coming with something, some numbers, you know, statistics. Again, the number of people involved and how you can become involved. Now it's open. If you look at the Ipcc page, a web page is open for reviewers. You can, you know, sign up if you want as scientist, if you are a scientist, or if government, if you are, you know, part of the government. I don't remember now all your background, but you can certainly be part of this process by, you know, commenting, by giving ideas and so on. So it's a sort of open access somehow review of the content. You know, now it's going through the process of the governments, but then it will be open for scrutiny to the public opinion, right? So here there's some number who is involved, and it is important because it reflects again, you know, the huge tension. I didn't speak about it, but there is a tension definitely between, you know, developed countries or industrialized countries and developing countries, especially for, you know, in terms of the money or who's giving what to whom and why, because we need, especially in developing countries, there is, you know, lack of financial resources. And one of the main issues during all the negotiation is, you know, who's going to pay for the climate change impacts to the country that are not responsible for climate change, but receive the highest impacts of climate change. So it's an issue of justice, it's an issue of equity distributions, is an issue of inequalities. It has to do with the global development agenda, right? So something that is happening not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries, but also in developing countries. So take also note about, you know, this is a very important point, because this is an issue that is certainly going on. And is part of since the beginning of the COP1 to now, countries still do not agree about, you know, not only the amount of money necessary for fighting the climate change phenomena, but also how do, you know, to deal with the kind of finance that we need to face the threats, right? Because now, the irony of climate change too, I didn't speak about it, but the irony is that the major impacts of climate change, mostly, you know, in tropical cyclone and hurricanes, and the effects are concentrated in the tropicals, where most of the population is living, and also are the poorest living in those parts of the world. So it's really, really an issue again of justice and equity and distribution. Okay. And certainly countries like in Africa, or if you want some in Central America or some in part in Asia, which are very poor, which do not contribute at all to emissions because they are not industrialized somehow. They do not produce so much emission that, part of the issue is, why as a country I am impacted and affected so much more than you, and you have more responsibility. This is also a principle that is somehow written within the United Framework Convention. It has to do with the shared responsibilities, among the countries. So again, the justice dimension, the equity dimension is a very important in the debate we have now about the climate governance somehow. All right. Well, this is also, to see, you can clearly see how the authors are divided by regions, Europe is of course having the most important part there. Then you get for North America, and then the other countries, right? So it's now, to my point of view, I hope no one of the Bureau or the Ipcc is here listening to me, but to me it's very much European oriented, which is, I understand it's fine somehow, but also remember all, and I'm saying that as a European origin too, but I'm saying this because we need balance. We need balance in terms of region, in representative. We need balance of visions. We need balance of information. And of course, it's not the same, doing research and where you have money and where you don't have. So again, it's rising a lot of very important justice dimensions issue. I hope I can be provocative in this comment, right? Okay, so this is another issue. If you're interested in the future to collaborate, or even now, as I said, now it's open for expert reviewer, but you can be coordinating author, lead author, reviewing, contributing author. So this is usually the governments are those who appoint the people, but there is certainly an open process for for being part of this one. Okay, so this is the other part. I don't know what time is it. Okay. I have another presentation, but do we want to open a bit of question? I need to take a bit of water or coffee. So if we, I hope I've been clear, and I really like to have comments and questions if you agree or no.
Yes, I think it's the right time to have questions. I think maybe to come back to one of the first question which was raised, which was about like the corporates. Yeah. And the contribution, or what kind of actual policies are launched by corporates, or what is really the material impact that they have on fighting climate change.
Yes. Yeah, sure. I didn't mention something important. Okay. How let's say how companies, international cooperation, the private sector is involved, but also what is the process now it's happening related to the Paris Agreement. I think I didn't mention that, but it's really crucial. So on one side, in the Paris Agreement, we changed completely from previous regime because under the Kyoto Protocol, countries were somehow obliged to comply with the reduction emissions. It was stated in the Kyoto Protocol that countries should comply with 5% of emission reductions in total, globally, based on a baseline from the 1990s, meaning that calculation of emission reduction should start from the 1990s, at the beginning of the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. When we moved from the Kyoto Protocol to the climate agreement, countries decided not to have binding obligation or binding commitment, but just simply, doing on a voluntary basis the emission reductions. This was really, really a hard moment because we passed, in terms of international law, if you want, from a regime which was based on compliance to a regime which is based on voluntary basis. So each of the countries now, through what is called the INDC, which is the National Determined Contribution, say and state how much it wants to reduce emissions based on a baseline that every country decides, and and how much again they will reduce by 2030, 2050, whatever. So to give you an example, Mexico has decided in the INDC, which was, by the way, was the first developing country to submit to the INDC in 2015. Mexico decided and said that by 2030 I want to reduce about 30-40% of my emission reduction, and maybe by 2050 be neutral, carbon neutral, meaning that I will not have emissions coming from fossil fuels, right? So each country, if you see in the list of the UNFCCC, each country has its own INDC and will decide how much emission will reduce. Okay. The point is that we don't know really. There is a tracker, interesting tracker of how much countries are reducing. Certainly, the biggest emitters like China, US, some countries of the European Union, not all. The European Union is doing somehow well, but certainly many countries are not complying. That's why I'm saying that we are not in track with the Paris Agreement. And one of the issues is that the private sector, especially in some of the biggest economies, didn't want to participate in the emission reduction efforts. Why? Why? Because again, it's something that transnational corporations, not all, but most of them still are based, in their issue of, because they are companies, there's a rationale of the company, the economy is to produce revenues, we know very well. So they prefer somehow to keep on with their own vision about, climate, and not contributed, if you want, to climate change based on this idea of reducing emission, because it costs, the internalization of environmental costs and so on. It's an issue that maybe I don't know very well as an economist. But I mean, we know that this is an issue that's much broader, but it has to do with the idea that we need, as a private company, somehow, to engage more about the contribution of reduction emission. And then the other major point is, because we don't have, this is another big irony. Guys, how countries measure their emissions? Well, it is based on calculation. It's simply based on models. It's based on simply, projections, because it's very difficult to calculate how much you can emit. I mean, countries have their inventories of gases, emission gases. What do? They have methodologies in their Ministry of the Environment to calculate, emission, but this is based on reports that companies and governments do. But in terms of transparency, which is a huge issue that we have, in the UNFCCC and in many other international environmental conventions, we need to know more about how do we do calculation and what is they based on, because sometimes numbers just come out blue. And this is really, really, it's crucial, because we really don't know if we are reducing emissions based on robust numbers. And again, this is something that's just shaky, somehow. So to me, it's really a certain concern, because I've seen in many countries how do they do, their emission inventory gases, and it's really, really questionable, right? So I'm saying this because, again, companies have a duty, depending on the laws that you have and the normative that is applying to your country, but they have to inform the government about the emission reduction. And when you have countries that, it depends again on the rules, on many other things, but we need them to be engaged much more, right? Mm-hmm. And the other irony on this point is that, most of the so-called social, how is it, the RCS, corporate social responsibility or something like that, most of the companies, CRC Act, most of the companies say, okay, I've received also my distinguished award every year because I reduce emission. Oh, come on, that's bullshit. Sorry, it's not true. It doesn't happen. And again, I had the opportunity to see, and this is really something you cannot get information from the companies or from the major emitters, because they are, guarded for secrets or for many other things. So we really have to make through that, an important make through, because otherwise, in my point of view, now one of the issues that, in this last AR6 report of the Ipcc, what we have is a representative for the major industrial company. There is an international association of private companies, which are part of this process, and there is an appointed representative who's participating in the meetings that we have. And they are also producing their own knowledge. I mean, remember that. It's important, because we are talking about powerful companies who have also the opportunity to produce knowledge. And they produce reports, they produce a lot of things with scientists of a very high information level, but, there is always, I'm sorry to say so, but it's also a problem of trust there, So again, maybe too critical, but I think it's part of the picture.
Okay.
Yep.
And do you see now a change of in terms of scientific knowledge regarding the from the US, or is it like in fact as basically the let's say the mandate of Trump also affected the quality and the publication also from the US in terms of climate change, or was it really that no impact on what scientists in the US are producing on climate change?
Well, yeah, that's a huge issue, of course. You know, I had the opportunity, I still have the opportunity to work with a lot of colleagues in the US, and you know, we passed 3 years ago when the IR6 started. All the colleagues from the major you know, given governmental agencies like NOAA, NASA, whatever, they were really scared somehow because they couldn't talk about climate change. You know, most of the project in private university about climate change had to change the name into something else because it was almost, you know, not allowed to talk about climate change. So it was really tough. And then, well, you know, things have changed, but we lost track. You know, in the last 3 years, anyway, the United States and somehow, you know, Canada and also Mexico, if you want, the whole region, which is one of the points I have in mind, you know, the whole region has been really turning around the issue of climate change as not doing enough, because now the region itself is responsible for almost, you know, 30% of the global emissions. You know, the US, of course, is the first one, but then you get Mexico and Canada somehow with the same level of emissions, and even in global and per capita. So meaning that you know, the business as usual scenario is going up somehow. So it's changing, and this means that you know, we are not again doing enough in this part of the world. Certainly the political coincidence that we are having now with the governments, you know, we changed, of course, the United States changed luckily somehow, but over the past 3 years there has been, you know, a lot of a delay in terms of action. You know, there has been a dismantling of national institutions like the Environmental Protection Agency in the US, which was having, you know, an important saying in the emissions reduction policy within the country, and it was basically dismantled. So over the past 3 years, we really don't know. I'm expecting now some assessment report by the colleagues in the US. They are trying to measure how much emissions, you know, were put off in the country over the past 3 years and more. And what will be the consequences also, you know, even though now, you know, Biden, which is fine, is said that it's back to the Paris Agreement, but we lost time. And this is the point that you are having with most of the country, you know, depending on the policy. Brazil is another case. Brazil is also going really backward, and many others. So, you know, you have also cases in Africa, you have also cases in Asia, and somehow in Europe. So the point is always there, you know, how much countries are able to comply with this Paris Agreement provisions that we have, you know, in the agreement, and then how much we will be able to reach the targets by 2030, because, you know, the evidence is, scientific evidence is clear. There is no way back. There is no return point. The planet is warming up so much, and is doubling almost the speed of the warming, and we really need to intervene and to have the sort of important vision, you know, let's say, from countries. So in this case, you know, remember also that the United States somehow, even with Obama, you know, they entered the Paris Agreement very late, only in the second mandate. And traditionally, the United States in international environmental law doesn't belong to most of the international community agreements. So this is also a singularity, if you want, a peculiarity of the United States. So if you look at the environmental history of the country, they really didn't belong to many of the international conventions. So it has to do, you know, with a lot of issues. But certainly we are facing complex times. I'm positive about some things, but I'm not positive about the way countries are taking seriously yet the problem, right?
I have also one point. I would like also the audience to raise questions if you have But otherwise, I have also one question about the WHO, and I saw that the World Health Organization is also involved. But how far is now the as part of the let's say adaptation and so on, the consequences of like the pandemic and so on, and the link with climate change made, and is it something that is part of the assessment, or is it something that would be like done later? And what is the role of the World Health Organization in this perspective?
You know, there has been a lot of literature. Remember that, you know, in the case of the Ipcc, you always start from revision of the literature. You don't produce, let's say, new science, but you do assessment of what has been published. So since you know, the pandemic started, there has been a lot of publication around the relation between climate change and the pandemic. And this is an issue related to sustainability too, because, you know, with this zoonotic issue about, you know, the transmission of the virus from species to humans has to do also with the pressure that we are doing as humans around, you know, the ecosystems. So basically nature is somehow responding. And this pressure is also very much linked to the climate change processes. So this is what I see in terms of science, you know, the link between sustainability and climate change and in this case, the pandemics. No? So this is why I guess that the World Health Organization is trying to get into. I'm not sure. I don't know really if it's going to be part of the assessment. But certainly, I can tell you about the literature that we have to consider. You know, what is coming out now in the assessment report about the relation between again climate change and the zoonosis process and so on. So, and this is because again it has to do with the alteration or the modification of the ecosystems. And the ecosystems, again, are modified because we have, you know, the drivers from climate change too. So again, this is the way, you know, I guess we should be reasoning as somehow scientists, let's say. But then you have to include other policy related issues, you know. But yeah, there has been, you know, a lot of concern about the issue of the pandemic, because, you know, I'm sure you remember, many of you at the beginning, you know, after 3 or 4 months of the pandemic, you know, we started to see some interesting picture about, you know, clean waters or clean airs in many cities in the world, especially in China or even Europe, you know, in some cities or in North America. And this was due because simply, you know, and this is a proof that the climate change is related to human-induced processes, because, you know, why cities became clean or water became clean? Because there was no economic processes, there were no emissions, there were no pollution. So this is strictly related, and you can clearly see there the you know, the linkage. This is why you know that. But again, this is interesting because it's going to be temporary. The sooner we start again with the economic processes or the recovery, you know, the green recovery, well, you will see again how much emission will be, you know, probably become stronger than before, because the economic process of recovery will have certainly a footprint on the way we look at the let's say we move forward in terms of economic recovery, you know. So that's a big issue now. The moment, how are we going to do our green recovery? How are we taking into account, you know, the climate change? This is an opportunity to start thinking over with new way of probably, you know, reinventing ourselves in the society somehow and our relations. But this is a very also philosophical issue. So I don't know. But the thing is that countries should have the opportunity now to think about, you know, what the pandemic is living as an opportunity somehow, you know, beside the deaths and the way that we have health system crashing or whatever. But my point is that we need to think about, you know, not to lose the opportunity again, right? This is the point.
Yeah.
I hope you agree.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I hope also we'll have a good discussion also about that with the students during the year. And I think also it makes a link with your next webinar, which will be in January, about like digitalization and the interlinkage with
yes.
climate change. And because I think digitalization could be part of the solution, but it could be also an issue sometimes. So if we don't really understand also the logic of digitalization and the potentiality, so I think it's important that this knowledge is also shared and that we have good grasp, and we do understand what digitalization means also for sustainable development. And I would like maybe to give a word to Wolf Reiners from DIE, because it's also thanks to Wolf that we could organize this webinar from the German Institute for Development, and which is also working on digitalization and sustainability. If you can say a few words about like DIE, and I think also the students will see you next year in Berlin.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you, Arno. Thank you also, Simone, for this very, very interesting and rich presentation. Yes, it's right. At the German Development Institute, we are very interested in this topic. We have an entire research program working on climate questions, climate governance. And we are also very interested in the interconnection of sustainable development and digitalization, and as part of that also the field of climate. I don't know exactly how far I should go with the background, but maybe I get for the students, it's interesting to know the German Development Institute is a leading think tank on sustainability research. We are a government-affiliated think tank. We work for the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development primarily, yet we are an independent institution also, and engage in activities, research, policy advice and training on fields which we deem important. Digitalization is one of them. Digitalization is also one topic that connects Simone to the DIE, since we are jointly implementing the Instituto Mora and the German Development Institute, an EU-funded project on digitalization, and that's how this entire joint venture with CIFE developed, and also how we try to connect a little bit as far as possible the lectures and the input that comes from me next year. Maybe that is a background for the presentation for Simone. I think it's really, really interesting. Important background for the discussions. I have a question. If you have the time, in Germany, people, or in Europe, people nowadays speak a little bit about, and you mentioned that in the presentation to some extent, about the so-called green consensus. Yeah, so now you find even in Economist, in the Financial Times, you will find headlines where it is clear, building back better, everything what is economic recovery, all the financial fiscal stimulus packages that are now unfolding, massive investments around the globe to counter the economic crash from the corona crisis. They are supposed to be green. Yeah, and this is what one could call a green consensus. And I would be interested to learn a little bit from how you see that. Maybe, is this a European isolated view from your perspective? How does Mexico look at that? Or do you maybe also know more about other countries?
Yeah, thanks for question, both. Yeah, I think it's somehow, it's I will say it's worldwide, but definitely who's taking the lead in this one is the European Union, I'm sure. Because, we had very recently a discussion on here in the case of the region for Mexico, US and Canada, related to the new NAFTA. I remember that, I didn't mention, but among other things, the region has shifted to a new agreement, a new free trade agreement, which is not free trade, actually. The free was taken out, but it's an agreement between the three countries. And the environment disappeared there. So one of the questions was, how do we do the green recovery now? Because the United States and Mexico together have now almost 500,000, a little bit less, with Canada 500,000 of deaths due to coronavirus. So this is probably the region most affected in terms of dead people due to coronavirus. And we know that policies probably has not been implemented in the right way. So the thing is that because there are, probably it has to do with the philosophy, if you want, of the way countries deal with the economics, which is still a major issue. So economics is much more important than many other things, to my point, here as an observer. So the green recovery itself is not part of a very holistic, or if you want, a very broad overview of the region. It may be that, in the future, something can be incorporated, let's say, in the new policy or in the New Deal of North America. But at the moment, I see that, this part, in the academics, in the community, scientific community, certainly the discourse is around, green recovery. But practically, if you want, even in terms of policy, I don't see there any progress. I'm not sure that we are doing a recovery, post-COVID based on green knowledge. Absolutely not. I mean, I'm probably very critical and even frustrated, if you want, somehow. But I really don't see. But again, it has to do, from a different approach about the economics, about the vulnerabilities, about poor communities, and a lot of things. So certainly is a different vision.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Wolf. Does anyone has a question?
Everything clear? I hope I didn't bore you guys. I hope everything was clear. Not sure. Yeah, it can be heavy because it's a very specific topic. So yeah. But yeah, I hope that in January we can have a link on the I'm also trying to struggle there with the issue of digitalization, because it's not easy to do the match in terms of not only concepts but also see where and how, because we will see, but I'm trying now to work on that too, and definitely we will need to think more about the relation and putting up there some of the pro and cons about having digitalization and climate change.
Yeah. In one sense, some people consider that the pandemic is a good test also for digitalization versus climate change, because somehow it transformed our way of living and working, and maybe also the mobility of people, and in quite a radical sense. And there are a lot of discussion about this pandemic period as also an experiment maybe for the future.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Well, thanks a lot. If somebody's interested, I can leave, in the chat my email, and I don't know if somebody wants to get in touch. I'm really glad to. And then through the PRODIGEES definitely project and whatever comes up from here, we are here. Mora, of course, and myself and my colleagues, very glad to keep discussing these topics.
Yeah, and then if things are getting better, also we hope that to see you in Europe next year, and also meet the students in person. So that would be great.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this session, and see you soon. I think tomorrow we'll have also a webinar together. So have a good evening, and see you tomorrow and next year for Simone and Wolf. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night, and keep safe, all of you.